budget bill. That did not happen, as he waited over and over again to see whether or not the Republicans would do what was done in the last administration and raise the debt ceiling, not for debt, but to pay America's bills. This picture depicts, with the Speaker Emeritus and Good Hope Baptist Church, children in daycare. And under the leadership of my friends, without the work that we're doing now to pay our bills and to, in actuality, ensure that non-discretionary funding, which takes care of Head Starts and child care, would have been literally thrown out, and families would be standing in line looking for an empty chair for their child to go in so they could go to work. That's what Democrats did. And today we stand on this floor to say that we will not allow the cruelty of default. We'll not allow hostage taking. We will stand for the American people. And we will ensure that the expansion of veterans and homeless persons and children in foster care that are now able to get SNAP, that is because we continue to fight even though we could not get the Republicans to come to the table for 4 or 5 months. I offered amendments to provide an increase or a provision for those students who are still in their families' homes.
Gentlelady's time's expired.
We care about America.
Gentlelady's no longer recognized. Gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. Gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized. Gentlelady's no longer recognized. Gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. Gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I continue to reserve.
Mr. Speaker, I'm now happy to yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 2 minutes.
And still I rise, Mr. Speaker, and I rise today with a testimony, the genesis of which is, I believe that President Biden did the best that he could in developing this legislation. I support him. I thank him for what he has done. I believe that Leader Jeffries did an outstanding job in making it perspicuously clear that default was not an option. But here is the essence of my testimony. I had the preeminent privilege of serving in Congress in 2008, September, I believe it was, when we had the downturn in the economy, and there was a clarion call for help to do what was called bail out the banks. I was adamantly, totally, completely opposed to bailing out the banks because I thought it was not the thing to do, given that the banks did not ask for our help in getting into the position that they were in. Well, I stood in the rear of this chamber, and I could see the votes as they were being tallied. I could also see the stock market reacting to the votes as they were being tallied. The stock market went down as the bill went down. 777 points, a 7% drop in the stock market. My constituents had told me not to vote for that bill, and I concurred with them. The next day, my constituents called. Why didn't you vote for that bill? Why did you let the market go down? I learned a lesson. Votes like this are votes of conscience, and you've got to vote your conscience knowing what the consequences are. I will vote for this bill because I understand the consequences of the market tanking. I was here and I saw it. I understand that
time's
we have
expired.
to take care of our people. And I will yield back, and I thank you for the time, Mr.
I thank
Speaker.
the gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. The gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may concern. I want to
Gentleman's
thank my
recognized.
friend from Texas for his remarks. I actually voted for that bill in 2008 twice. And I'm glad that he's here today. The reality is the bill we're dealing with, it's hard to tell it listening to debate, is a compromise between House Republicans and the President of the United States. In that compromise, nobody got everything they wanted. We certainly didn't get everything we wanted. But I think we are acting together, as my friend from Texas suggested, to try and make sure that we don't default, that we don't have a day like we had in 2008. That, at least, is something we can agree on together and celebrate together. and we'll continue to try to work together. But the preeminent problem we have is my friends on the other side think we can spend forever. You know, President Obama never introduced a budget that balanced, ever. Not in 10 years, 20, or 100. Frankly, President Biden has never introduced a budget that comes into balance at any point. You can't sustain that indefinitely. This effort is to both, one, to responsibly raise our debt ceiling, but to begin to address the underlying spending problem. I wish we could have done more in that regard, but I'm glad we got done what we did, and we'll continue to work at this. With that, Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Oklahoma reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, last time I checked, the Republican conference hasn't provided us with a budget, passed a budget. I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Landsman.
Gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to encourage my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support tonight's vote on the Bipartisan Budget Act. There are three aspects of this bill, a bill that will avoid default, and a bill that protects Social Security and Medicare, that I hope my colleagues and fellow citizens take into account. One is that we can't keep doing this. The brinkmanship around this question of default and paying our bills has to end. It's a terrible process. Folks have been calling our offices. They're worried about their Social Security checks. They're worried about their health care. They're worried about whether or not the economy will crash. We cannot keep normalizing this behavior. Two, the bill does represent the fact that Congress is divided. The president negotiated with Speaker McCarthy, and even though a majority of Americans want Congress to balance this budget by fixing the tax code, the majority has said—
Time's expired.
Another 30 seconds.
The majority has said that is off the table. What I needed to see from this bill was that no veterans would lose their benefits and folks would continue to receive Social Security checks, and no child would lose access to food through the SNAP program. This bill does that, and so I'm voting yes. We need more bipartisan, pragmatic leaders to stand up and pass this bill tonight and to continue to work on behalf of the American people. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. Gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may
Gentleman's
consume.
recognized.
Just to quickly make a point to my friend, the Democratic Congress didn't produce a budget in 4 years. 4 years were you in the majority, not out of Budget Committee, let alone across the floor of the House. So you left things in quite a mess, and it's going to take a while to fix it. But we are working on a budget. I hope we get one. The reality is, though, the country has allowed itself, primarily under Democratic leadership, to get so deeply in debt, it's pretty tough to write a budget that gets us out of debt in any reasonable time. This bill is at least a step in the right direction. We would have liked to taken a bigger step. We weren't able to do that given the fact that we have a Democratic Senate, a Democratic President, both of whom seem to think they can spend endlessly, recklessly, without end, indefinitely. That's not going to happen. So sooner or later, that reckoning will come. This is an effort to forestall that and buy some time. That we worked together. I'm glad that we did. I'm glad the president came to the negotiating table despite wasting months saying that he wasn't going to. And I'm glad we made the minimal progress that we did. But let's not kid ourselves. This is the first step in the right direction, and it's not as big a step as anybody on my side of the aisle would have liked to take. With that, Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Oklahoma reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if we want to talk about messes, let me just remind everybody that the last time my Republican friends were in charge, they left us with the longest government shutdown in U.S. history. I now yield 1.5 minutes to the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Wasserman Schultz.
Gentlelady from Florida is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of the bipartisan budget agreement and thank President Biden and his team, particularly OMB Director Shalonda Young, for putting people over politics, defending our values, and protecting the full faith and credit of the United States. My colleagues across the aisle were prepared to force a disastrous default and crash the economy into the side of a cliff. But Democrats will always put people over politics and our economy's durability over default. My friend from Oklahoma knows well that Republicans' VA appropriations bill zeroed out guaranteed funding for our toxic exposed veterans in fiscal year 25. It's in the bill in black and white. And it's why they were afraid to vote on it and pulled the bill from consideration. Democrats protected toxic-exposed veterans' health care, expanded SNAP benefits to more food-insecure people, and stopped Republicans' dangerous budget cuts in the Default on America Act. Yesterday, CBO officially scored the bill and found that participation rates in SNAP will increase because of this compromise. President Biden negotiated a deal that gets us through the short term and puts us in a good position to work through the appropriations process. As an appropriator, I look forward to working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to efficiently finish this year's budget. And I'll remind my friend from Oklahoma that under the Trump administration, Republicans blew a hole in the deficit with a $1.5 trillion tax cut package that was unpaid for. So that's on them. I encourage my colleagues to vote in favor of the underlying legislation, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. The gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume. Just to my good friend from Florida, what unbalanced the budget was COVID. And we all know that. And we worked actually together on that. But that's what spent billions of dollars in a relatively short period of time. Quite frankly, in terms of where we are today, my friends have never submitted a budget that comes into balance. President Obama did. The last president to do that was Democrat, was President Clinton. Now, we disagreed over how to get to balance, but he actually submitted budgets that came to balance in 10 years. President Obama didn't do that. President Biden hasn't done that. Until you return to the Clinton era, where you actually did believe in balanced budgets, we disagreed how to get there. I think we're going to have a hard time getting on top of our fiscal problem. But this bill, where we do agree, we don't like every part of it. We would have liked to have done more. My friends would have liked to have spent more. But the reality is it does move us in the right direction. So I'm happy for the bipartisanship, but I do note it took us a long time. And I also note from my Democratic friends, remember, so far to this point, the only people who voted to raise the debt ceiling are on this side of the aisle. My friends have not yet provided a single vote to raise the debt ceiling. Their body they control in the United States Senate has not presented a bill, let alone moved one across the floor. We did. My friends didn't like that bill. We sat down, negotiated, came to something different. But at least we voted to raise the debt ceiling. My friends who are concerned about it have neither presented a plan to deal with it nor have voted to act upon the problem. I'm hopeful today that many of them will actually join us in that effort because the President of the United States has come to the negotiating table, and we'll move forward together. But rest assured, we're not moving forward as fast as we should. We're not going as far as we should, and we've had to bring you to this point, kicking and screaming every step of the way. With that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Oklahoma reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts recognized.
Yeah. The gentleman's absolutely right that COVID did add to the deficit, but he neglected to mention the multi-trillion-dollar tax cut for the rich that was unpaid for. Mr. Speaker, I have no other request for time. May I ask the gentleman?
I'm prepared to close when my friend is.
So, Mr. Speaker, I'll yield myself the remaining time.
Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I think there is a difference between Democrats and Republicans. I think Democrats have proven that we can govern, and Republicans have proven they cannot. We've seen the great things that government is capable of doing. In the last Congress, with Democrats in charge of the House, we invested to rebuild our neglected infrastructure, airports, roads, bridges, and ports, and all of our communities. We will see the benefits of that infrastructure bill for years and years to come. We brought manufacturing back to the United States. We passed the CHIPS and Science Act to drive innovation and create good-paying jobs. We made the largest investment in climate, protecting our water and our air. We strengthened our supply chains and set up new programs to support minority businesses. We lifted a record number of kids out of poverty in this country. We ensured that our veterans get the health care that they earned, and so it's possible for us to deliver for the American people, though I haven't seen much of it this year. Instead, Republicans spent a week in January trying to elect a speaker. Republicans spent the last 5 months trying to destroy everything that we built over the last 2 years. They have only enacted 3 laws in 5 months, and those laws don't do much. The bill we are debating today may become their 4th law. It would be their biggest legislative accomplishment of the year. Think about that. The biggest accomplishment will be ending a crisis that they created. We've wasted time going back and forth on how to pay our bills. The fact that we've had to bend and contort ourselves to get this done to prevent our economy from falling off a cliff because Republicans wanted to play games is unconscionable, and it doesn't bode well for the future. Finally, let me just say to my colleagues, I plead with my colleagues on the Republican side to stop this assault against the poor. Every concession in this bill, every demand that Republicans made in this bill hurts somebody and hurts the most vulnerable in our country. Going after SNAP for older people, a measly $6 a day benefit. Shame on you for doing that. We're here to help people. We're here to uplift people. We're not here to demean people. We're not here to try to punish people. And quite frankly, the narrative that the Republicans have been utilizing in this whole debate doesn't reflect the reality. Talk to the people in your district who are struggling. Let them tell you how difficult it is to make ends meet and how maddening it is to not know whether you could put food on the table. We can do so much better. But you have to stop this assault against the poor, against the vulnerable in this country. We need to do better, and I urge all my colleagues, as we move forward in the coming months, to keep that in mind. We are here to bring everybody forward, not just a selective few. We're here to represent everybody, not just the rich and powerful and well-connected and people who give to our campaigns. And again, the contrast here, where we have members of Congress who accepted government-subsidized loan forgiveness for PPP, and they're the ones who are out here demanding that we nickel and dime programs like SNAP and TANF. It is disgusting, quite frankly, that we're even having this debate. We should be able to do so much better. Mr. Speaker, with that, I yield back my time.
Gentleman from Massachusetts yields. The gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself the balance of my time.
Gentleman's recognized.
My friend ticked through the impressive list of accomplishments of the last Congress. He forgot to mention Democrats also added $10 trillion. $10 trillion to the projected debt the United States will have to deal with over the next 10 years. Now, $10 trillion is a lot of money. But worse than the money was the inflation that they unleashed by their reckless spending. You care about Americans, then you don't push the price up of gasoline, of home heating, of interest rates on their any purchase they make, what they pay at the grocery store. My friends managed to unleash the worst bout of inflation in 40 years. I look around this chamber, I'm probably the only guy on the floor, Mr. Speaker, that can actually remember that. This was an unprecedented disaster that they unleashed on the country. Everything in the bill that we fought for, the things that are there and the things that aren't there, were to lower the excess spending and to try and tame inflation. My friends act as if it doesn't exist. Well, I guarantee you, just go to the grocery store. Ask any American who hasn't gotten a 15 or 20% raise what their life has been like in the last 2 years. So, Mr. Speaker, in closing, I urge all my colleagues to support this resolution. With today's bill, we're putting forward common sense reforms that will save taxpayers money while also preventing an economic crisis. And the reforms included in this bill are historic. The first year-over-year cut in spending in a debt ceiling bill, the largest rescission of appropriated but unspent funds in history, the first real reforms to requirements for SNAP and TANF, which will help lift people out of poverty, and real reforms to the permitting process, which will streamline major infrastructure and energy projects and cut the red tape that are holding them back. Those are reforms, by the way, that my friends did not support. Now, those were things that were put in the bill by Republicans and negotiated for. Sadly, they weren't willing to work with us on those ends, and it was only the threat of the debt ceiling that actually brought them to the table. It's a responsible thing to do to pass this legislation, and in the end, the American people will be better off for it. I do want to be clear on something, Mr. Speaker. This is not the end of House Republicans' fight for necessary fiscal reforms. We have more than $31 trillion in debt. Programs like Medicare and Social Security, which are the bedrock of our safety net, are growing in an unsustainable manner. And for too long, this Congress has seen fit to just allow mandatory programs to eat up more and more of our budget. Indeed, the president himself refused to talk about those programs. Mandatory programs are now more than 2/3 of what we spend in any given year. Without real reforms to these programs, we'll have no chance to right the fiscal imbalance the country finds itself in. Republicans are committed to preserving America's status as the greatest nation in the world. And to do that, we must get serious about the national debt. But at the end of the day, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. This bill, Mr. Speaker, is that first step. Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time and move the previous question on the resolution.
Gentleman yields back. Without objection, the previous question is ordered. The question is on the adoption of the resolution. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
As for the yeas and nays.
Yeas and nays have been requested. Those in favoring the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having arisen, the yeas and nays are orders. Member will record their votes by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 9 of Rule 20, this 15-minute vote on adoption of the resolution will be followed by 5-minute votes on the resolution, on the motion to suspend the rules and agree to the House Resolution 382. This is a 15-minute vote. On this vote, the yeas are 241, the nays are 187. The resolution is adopted. Without objection, the motion reconsider is laid upon the table. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the unfinished business is the vote on the motion from the gentleman from California, Mr. Isis, to suspend the rules and agree to HRS 382, as amended, on which the yeas and nays are ordered. The clerk will report the title.
House Resolution 382, resolution condemning the rise of anti-Semitism and calling on elected officials to identify and educate others on the contributions of the Jewish American community.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and agree to HRS 382 as amended? Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote.